A very short lesson here, just recapping the immune response and some of the different types of immune responses that we can have in the body. So we're going to focus on this diagram firstly here, and this is a diagram that can pop up in a few different variations in both tests and in exams. So let's look at the axes first of all. So as we can see on the x-axis, we just simply have time in days, and we can see that this is going up on a weekly basis. And on our y-axis, we can then see that we have antibody concentration within the plasma running around in the bloodstream. So this is going up in a logarithmic scale, as we can see. So in the case of initial antigen exposure, so the first time you get sick with a particular pathogen, could be bacteria, virus, you name it, it takes quite a while for this immune response to build up. It takes quite a while for the humoral response in particular to produce antibodies in a high concentration. And as we can see, it's a very slow response, and we don't get a large peak with antibody production either. So we get quite a small peak. What happens is eventually the body has fought off the particular pathogen and the number of antibodies dips within the body. It never goes quite back to zero, and the reasoning here is that we still have the production and maintenance of memory cells. Now these memory cells, as you remember from our lesson on the humoral immune response, will maintain themselves within the body so that if you were to get sick again, we can mount a really rapid response. And this is what we're going to look at now. So as you can see, we then have I won't use green, I'll use orange here. We then have the second antigen exposure, so the second time they're introduced to the same pathogen. And what's begun to happen here is now we have a very rapid spike in the number of antibodies that are produced. So not only is it much faster, if we look at the gradient of that slope, but it is also significantly higher than the original primary response. So what this is going to mean for this particular individual is, despite exposure to the pathogen for a second time, they're very unlikely to be inhibited with any symptoms or anything like that, as the body can deal with the pathogen very, very quickly. So we've got some notes over here to the right. This is effectively a summary of what we've just spoken about. So in the case of the initial exposure or the primary response, this is the first time that you're introduced to a particular antigen. Key things to note: it's a very slow response because it takes a long time to build up the number of antibodies that you need, and memory cells are produced here. In the secondary response, this is any subsequent exposure. So we've mentioned that this is the second time. It could also be the third, fourth, you name it, time that you get sick with this. What we have with this secondary response, however, is that this is a very rapid response, and it's because memory cells are already present, so plasma cells are going to form faster as those memory cells divide. And for us, the great thing is we rarely exhibit any instance of illness or symptoms. So our final sort of idea here is, in the case of acquired immunity, how can we become immune to a particular pathogen? So we have two sort of ideas here. We have this idea of active versus passive immunity, and we also have this notion of artificial versus natural immunity. So in the case of active immunity, this is where your body is exposed to a particular antigen and has to do the work itself. You have to work out, your body has to work out how to make antibodies in response. So what this is going to result in is a longer time period where we're trying to produce an immune response, because it takes a while for your body to learn, adapt, and overcome a particular pathogen. Now this is opposed to passive immunity, where rather than producing the antibodies, we can provide a person with antibodies, okay? And they can be antibodies produced by someone else, and that means that the body itself plays no part in the production of antibodies, so the immune system doesn't have to learn how to respond. So this is passive. On the bottom half of this slide, we can now see artificial versus natural. Artificial immunity is where we provide people, okay, with an antibody or an antigen, okay? And this is compared to natural, where this occurs without human intervention. So if we're linking any ideas together, it's very easy to link artificial and passive together, and it's also quite easy to link active and natural together as well. So this is another representation of this information that we've just spoken about. So when we're having a look here, as you can see, with the case of naturally acquired immunity, in the case of active natural immunity, this is where microbes introduce themselves into the body naturally, so where someone naturally gets sick, and then we have to produce our own antibodies. We have to produce, so antigens enter the body naturally, and this means that the body has to produce its own immune response. In the case of natural passive immunity, there's only a few instances of this. The main one is largely where mothers and young children will pass on their antibodies through the breast milk onto the infant. And this is because the infant's body at such an early stage in its development doesn't have the ability to produce a high quantity of antibodies. So I'll highlight this last key point here. In the case of artificial active immunity, so this is where we could talk about vaccines, and in response to this particular vaccine, the body still needs to produce its own immune response. So we're artificially introducing antigens, so weakened or dead fragments of a particular pathogen, and these inactivated pathogens are then fought off by the body as they still have the same antigen on the cell surface, and so the body will produce its own immune response despite being at no harm, or at no risk of harm, I should say. Finally, we have artificial passive immunity. So for instance, the example here is immune serums that we can introduce, such as antivenom, to treat snake bites. Now the body in this instance doesn't need to produce any antibodies whatsoever. The immune serum itself is actually simply antibodies that are going to fight off that or fight off that venom.